once again to review the papers, the anthropologist Mariana Hotta and the presenter and writer Matthew Stadlin. Some good selections this time, guys. Let's crack on. Marianne, your story on the front of the Sunday Times, and it is a story, as the kind of the sub-headline points out, that it is very, very reminiscent of that horrible, horrible tale from many years ago, thalidomide.
Yeah, this is an absolutely shocking story that, honestly, Neil, I hadn't heard of before now. And the number of babies and families affected by this is massively greater than the thalidomide scandal. So what it is it's an epilepsy drug called sodium valproate that is prescribed to people to help them control their epileptic seizures. Since 1973, health officials and the manufacturers, so the pharmaceutical company that makes this drug, Sanofi, have known about and had concerns over whether a woman taking this while she's pregnant could cause abnormalities and disability in the fetus, and then obviously the child when it's born. And this can be autism, learning difficulties, and physical deformities. Legs and hands and arms are kind of born deformed, as well as brain, skeletal and gut problems. So this is a really profoundly damaging drug if you take it while you're pregnant. The scandal comes in that these first warnings were issued in 1973, and there have been subsequent inquiries, reports, published peer-reviewed papers that have not actually trickled through into giving patients the information and giving clinicians, GPs and neurologists who are helping people control their epilepsy, the information that they need in order to make decisions. Because obviously you don't want to have uncontrolled epileptic fits, that's not good for mother or baby, but neither do you want to be taking a drug that could potentially cause deformities in your unborn child. It is still the case that women are being prescribed this drug, sodium valproate, even now. So the most recent data is from March, and it shows that between April 2018 and September 2021, 247 women were prescribed this drug, which means that 6 babies a month, Neil, are being born with deformities that could be potentially avoidable. That's partly because these drugs are being given to women in plain packets, and so the information leaflet isn't there by pharmacists, not on sort of, not off the internet or anything like that, by your GP or your pharmacist. Plain packets or stickers stuck over the warnings saying, don't take this drug if you're planning to be pregnant or you are pregnant. And this is an absolute scandal. There was a report in 2020, an independent review, which called for families affected by this to be rewarded compensation. It doesn't change, obviously, the tragedy of what's happened to their children or what's happened to their family, but it helps them cope with the costs that a lifetime of care require. And so far, the government have resisted. They've issued an apology. They've said in the report it was disjointed, siloed, unresponsive and defensive response to these families' concerns. But I think now is the time that we all need to say, look, no more. These families need compensation for a tragedy that was entirely avoidable.
Matthew, take us to the front of the Observer. The Prime Minister's Rwanda plan has been getting criticised from any number of directions, but with the head of the Anglican Church coming in, he's getting criticism from top down at the moment, from the guy upstairs.
Yeah, this is a remarkable story because, on the one hand, you might think that the Prime Minister is sitting in checkers over his Easter eggs this morning, incredibly grateful that the fact that he's, I think, the first Prime Minister ever to have been found guilty of breaking his own law this week is not on the front pages. But then this dead cat that he's thrown in the ring, the idea of throwing Rwandan refugees or refugees to this country to Rwanda, which, by the way, I think is probably unlikely to work in practice. Very few people, I suspect, will ever make it after legal challenges. But that is on the front page, not just of the Observer, left-leaning, of course, but also the Conservative backing Sunday Telegraph. And what Justin Welby is doing, he's using his speech this morning, his sermon, his Easter Sunday sermon, which is one of the 2 biggest sermons he'd make each year, the other one, of course, over Christmas, he's using that to condemn this policy as basically unethical and going against the judgment of God. He says the details are for politics, but this goes against the judgment of God, and it goes against the responsibility that we have as a country to uphold our values, which, of course, are based on the Christian tradition.
Sure. But Matthew, sorry. When he says ungodly, what on earth does he mean? If he's accusing the Conservatives of being evil, why doesn't he just say that?
Well, I think we all know what ungodly means.
Genuinely, I don't know in this context what he means by that. What do you take it to mean?
Well, I take it to mean lacking in compassion. I mean, don't forget, this is a weekend where we celebrate the resurrection of Christ. We celebrate the idea of hope. And yet here are people who are destitute, who are devoid of almost any hope. They struggle to get to this country. They're so desperate to get to this country, don't forget, Neil, that they're prepared to risk their lives in the Channel. And what do we do with them, or some of them, once they get here? We send them to a country, Rwanda, which is presided over by a president, Paul Kagame, who's been in power since 2000. He was vice president before that, dating back to the 1994 aftermath of the genocide. He's accused of basically being an autocrat, if not a dictator, and accused of multiple human rights abuses. And we're sending these vulnerable people, after giving them, I think, a five-day opening window for review. We're sending them there. That's not about hope. That's not about decency. That's not about goodness. It's ungodly and I think immoral.
Mary-Anne, can we skip ahead one and go to your story in the Mirror? Prisoners being trained as football coaches. What's this about?
Yeah, just as a kind of little palate cleanser, because the news is heavy this morning. So this is HMP Featherstone, which is near Wolverhampton, and they've been working with Walsall Football Club to basically train some of the lads there in being football coaches. So they get an accredited qualification, they learn enhanced life skills, team building skills, all those good things that actually mean you can change your life and build a kind of a good law-abiding life when you finally get out, and possibly also add value when you're still in prison serving your term. And they used to apparently have a football club, Featherstone Prison Football Club, that they won the Staffs County Senior League in 2014. Perhaps unsurprisingly, at that point, they played all their games at home.
Very, very good, Mary-Anne. Your story on the front of The Independent, Matthew, this demand for action for Ukrainian refugees. I mean, we've been talking an awfully good game in terms of rehousing these people, but when we actually get down to it, how many have got here? How many have actually found homes?
Yeah, and by the way, that story that Mary-Anne chose, and great gag at the end, I mean, that's about rehabilitation, isn't it? It's about hope. It's about giving people a second chance. But this story on the front page of The Independent, I mean, we all know there's been a huge outpouring of public generosity, Brits being really generous towards Ukrainian refugees, and it doesn't seem to be met by this rather venal government, as many would see it. 250,000 people have signed this independent-led petition, which is calling on the government to do more, provide more shelter, provide more relief for those who are suffering the appalling treatment they've been dished out at the hands of Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. Let's hope it makes a difference, because 10 million people, let's not forget now, have been displaced in just over a month by Putin's war in Ukraine. And we have taken a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of those people here in the UK. And the reality on the ground here, what the government has allowed us to do, doesn't match, as I say, that generosity, the outpouring of generosity by Brits themselves. Isn't it interesting, by the way, Neil, that Ukraine has now pretty much been pushed off the front pages? There's a worry that there's empathy fatigue, but what Putin is doing in Ukraine is still absolutely appalling. He's now attacking Kiev again after that quite remarkable story this week when Russia's flagship in the Black Sea, I think their third most powerful warship, seems to have been struck by Ukrainian missiles.
Matthew, Mary-Anne, we will see you again for the third round of papers, after I forgot that we were doing the show until 10 o'clock today. We'll see you very, very shortly indeed. For now, thanks very much. Just a bit of breaking news reaching us from inside Ukraine. We have, of course, heard a number of reports of attacks there. A missile attack in the early hours of Sunday is said to have damaged infrastructure in the city of Brovary, near the Ukrainian capital. We'll have more on that and the rest of the news after this.